Good morning, everybody. Welcome to day 2 of the 2024 California Tire Conference with our theme, Driving Toward a Circular Economy. Russ down here told me this morning, reminded me it's summer solstice today, longest day of the year. This portion is going to go fast. So I'll just tell you, we've got a lot of fantastic content today. We're going to jump right into it here in just a couple minutes, and then we'll be finished by about 4:15 is the goal, so we can get you on your way. I wanted to thank you all for attending yesterday, for our virtual audience, in-person audience. Maybe we have some new people here today. I am Kyle Pogue, Environmental Program Manager with CalRecycle, emceeing this today. And then just as a reminder for the audience, for questions in the room, we're saving the questions till the end of the panel. Then we'll have some mic runners, me included, passing the mic to those in the room to ask the questions. And want to make sure that we get the microphone to you so our virtual audience and the people in the room can hear your question. And we're also recording this. So in follow-up, you'll be able to listen in again and see the PowerPoint presentations post-conference. So I think I covered it all. Other than, let's go on to this session. And so if this panelists could come on up, we'll get moving that direction. I will say it was a really fun reception last night. I hope you were able to get out, if you were here, to get out into Sacramento a little bit. Beautiful evening, beautiful morning here in Sacramento. A lot to enjoy in the area. Okay, so I am going to go ahead and start. Do we have everybody? Okay. Yes. Okay. I'm now going to turn this session, which is Trends in California Tire Recycling and Markets. I'm going to turn this over to Joaquin Wright, Technical Director from GHD. Take it away. Thanks, Joaquin. And you welcome to come
Anyway, good morning. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. So this is session 7, Trends in California Tire Recycling and Markets and Challenges in Circularity of Synthetic Turf and Infill. So I'm Joaquin Wright. I'll be speaking to trends in California, and then Jeremy here will take over and speak to turf infill. So before I begin, this is basically a summary of the 2022 California Waste Tire Market Report. We're in the process of doing 2023, so I'm going to add some information about what we know so far for the next report. But this is available online if you'd like to get this report. This presentation was prepared by GHD Inc. in partnership with subcontractors DK Enterprises, and Denise is here, a very, very important part of this report and all of today as well. Boysen Consulting and WEC LLC also participated. We sincerely thank the many industry stakeholders who contributed their information, data, and insights, as well as CalRecycle staff who coordinated access to department databases and clarified program policies and trends. It takes a team. So, today I'm going to talk about the bottom line, market trends by category, and then the recycling outlook. So the 2022 summary is there was an increased total amount of managed tires. There was an increased total amount of managed tires from the pandemic years. The recycling rate in California was unchanged, although the tonnage increased, and there was a slight decrease in the diversion rate. The challenges during 2022 were transitioning out of the COVID period, changed consumer patterns, rebound spending, economic resetting from COVID support, rising inflation was happening in 2022. In fact, I think it peaked in June of 22. There was a perceived 2023 recession risk. Low unemployment with increased wages has led to staffing challenges and export-import challenges of demand changes in cost. We'll get into that in a little more in depth here. This is a pie chart of the 2022 total tonnage. And you can see landfill disposal was 49.6%. And if we're looking at this pie chart from a clockwise perspective, we have retreads at 9.5%, used tires 8.2%, TDA 1.2%, crumb and ground rubber at 13%, and other recycling at 2.8%. And if we summarize that group, we call that the recycling component, and it was 34.7% of the total, 208,777 tons for 2022. If we continue to go around our pie chart there, and we have TDF exported 6.2%, TDF in-state 5.4%, baled waste tires and treads exported at 0.6%, alternative daily cover at 3.5%. If we summarize that, that's disposal related is the category we give that, 15.7%, 94,163 tons. And obviously that includes the TDF and ADC components. This is another way to look at that data, but over perspective of the last 10 or so years. So we can get a lot of stuff out of this chart just from looking at the colors. Basically on the bottom you have landfills, and as we move forward here, we really like to look at the last, say, 3 or 4 years. We're seeing, basically since the pandemic, we're seeing landfill increases pretty steep over the last 4 years. So a lot of material is going to the landfills. And from 2021 to 2022, we also saw that increase. We can see, I can go through all of them, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to point out a couple. We have at the top, we have retreads. We can see the retreads have been pretty consistent and growing. That's the top yellow bar. And then TDA, you can see civil engineering is in the middle, is that thin little bar. It's stayed pretty thin over the last 3 or 4 years and declining. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So that's pretty much a way to see. We're seeing total tonnage increase. In the last 3 years, we're seeing that increase, and we're seeing that kind of correlated here with landfills. So a lot of material, as the tonnage increased, a lot of it was going to the landfills. And when we get into the market segments, we'll kind of understand that a little bit more here. So now we're going to look at these trends by category. This is landfill disposal. And if we could see again, we're looking at the far right, we're looking at the last 3 or 4 years. We've seen a pretty dramatic increase in landfill disposal, 298,000 tons, 49.6% of the total is where we are at the end of 2022. That's 16.3% over 2021. It's a 20 plus year record high. Some of the reasons, which we'll see a little later as well, is we have a shift from in-state TDF where the material isn't going as much to TDF in-state, and so that's likely going to the landfill to help to be part of that increase in the landfill tonnage. During 2022, exports were very limited, so that material also wasn't going out and probably contributes to the landfill increase. If we look at 2023 and 24, we're seeing a decrease in the tonnage, so this value is likely to at least stabilize, if not decrease. And there's some variety of reasons for that we're looking into, but that's what we're seeing for 2023 and 24. So this is likely the peak in this time period. So this is alternative daily cover at landfills. From 21 to 22, we saw a 3.5% increase. And you can see over the last 10 years, there's been a gradual increase in usage, up 18% from 21 to 22 at 2 landfills. And again, what we're seeing now and likely for 24 as well is that this is the top of the peak, and we're going to likely see a decrease over the next couple reports, 23 and 24. And alternative daily cover is in a way somehow tied to landfills. When a landfill is really busy, then those 2 landfills that are using ADC, when they're really busy, they're likely to have a much bigger open face, and they're likely to use more ADC. So when we see landfill decline, well, we're likely to see ADC decline as well. All right, so here we have exported TDF and baled waste tires. If we look at the chart, what we're seeing is on the bottom is the red line is total exported TDF bales, and we can see basically from 2020 to 2022, there really wasn't any of that material moving. That would be part of the backed up ports and things of that nature. And then if we look at the line above that, that's size reduced TDF, and then the line on the top is a summary of both of those quantities. So there was approximately 40,000 tons, 6.7% of the total in 2022. That was a decrease of 8.4%. Obviously, when we look at the graph, it wasn't bale tires, that was a decrease in just size reduced TDF. So markets overseas were still restricted in 2022. When the material goes overseas, it's used in cement kilns, power plants, pulp and paper and chemical plants in select countries. And as I mentioned, you can see that waste tire baled exports were essentially the same since 2020, low international demand and hard to export it out. In 2023 and 24, the export demand is growing. I know we heard from someone yesterday saying that it was gangbusters right now, and the numbers that we have so far been able to get are showing that. So in terms of looking forward to 23 data and 24, we're going to see a drastic increase in the exports of TDF and of baled tires. So here's the in-state TDF story. You can see on the graph that on the bottom we have fiber, which is a component that comes from waste tires after they're shredded up, and that gets, some places use that as fuel. And you can see over the last 4 years, what we're really looking at is a drastic a relative decrease in total TDF in state. 2022 was 32,457 tons, 5.4% of the total tonnage, down 32.7%. This is really due to changing cement kiln fuel specifications. One in particular changed their specification to a specification that the producers in the state didn't feel like delivering, so they're not delivering to that particular plant, and so that has, over the last couple of years, brought the numbers down a lot. 2023 and 24, we're still seeing the numbers continue to go down in 23 and likely 24. That's also, when we look at the whole picture, the TDF is tied in a sense to the exports. You know, this is all about where the demand is for the product, and the export demand is obviously really high right now. So if you were a producer, you'd rather send it off than send it to a TDF facility. Tire-derived aggregates. So this is a crazy graph, and if you look at the graphical representation, we have landfill projects and non-landfill projects. Landfill projects are like gas extraction trenches and wet weather pads, things of that nature. And then we have non-landfill projects like we saw yesterday, road repairs, vibration attenuation, things like that. And historically, it's kind of a hit and miss, on and off. Sometimes there's a lot of material being used and sometimes there isn't. In general, it's pretty even if we were to average it all out. There have been environmental concerns that have stunted non-landfill project use in the state of California. So although we do still have some on the radar, not quite as robust as it has been in the past. There's a current grant solicitation, $750,000 per year allocated at CalRecycle. And this is 2022 numbers, was 7,371 tons, a very 1.2% of the total, and it was increased by 10% over the previous year, and this is really landfill use in the last couple of years, as the graph shows. Coming up, we did have 2023, the vibration mitigation project you hopefully saw yesterday. It used approximately, the typo there, about 6,000 tons. And so on our graph for the next report, we'll see an increase in that. And in general, the landfills are on and off. Every time they do an expansion, the landfills that use TDA, when they do an expansion gas project, then they use TDA, and then they'll have a year or two where they're not doing a gas expansion. So that's kind of why you see a lot of the erratic tonnage on the graph. All right, crumb and ground rubber. And as you can see, is a robust use and has been going up over the last couple of years. In 2022, it was 78,341 tons, a 13% of the total, 9.5% increase over the previous year. And in general, we don't track or get to the specific numbers of paving and other things, but we have an approximation that 41,000 tons was gone to paving, that's not Caltrans, and then molded and other projects, 15,000 tons approximately, and 10,000 for turf infill, and ground rubber approximately 3,000 tons. We're expecting to see this stabilize, meaning it'll probably be about the same, if not a little bit less, in 2023. This is a graph showing the used tires over the years, 49,112 tons in 2022. 8.2% of the total. The used tires are sold in California shops and are also exported into Mexico. There is a cap for how much can go to Mexico, and in general, it typically ranges from 8 to 10% of the total managed. That's how much is going off to used tires to be resold. Retread, this is our retread story, 57,366 tons, 9.5% of the total, up 5+% from 2021. So the reduced amount, the retreads can be tied a lot to the amount of imported new tires. So when you have inexpensive new tires, you can have less retreading. And so it's a competitive thing where retreads are competing with inexpensive import tires. 2023-24 trend. You can see when we look at the graph that it's the same story. This has been a positive thing over the last couple of years, and we're looking at seeing that that's going to stabilize based on this give and pull of import tires and the inexpensive ones. This is showing Caltrans historical rubberized paving. So when we look on the left graph, we're seeing, we look at the bar charts, that's total hot mix asphalt. And that's how much Caltrans is putting out in hot mix asphalt. And then the line is the rubberized hot mix. So that's a percentage of that total. So it's at about 35.8% was 2022. And that's what we're seeing on the left side. On the right side, we're seeing the Caltrans crumb rubber use. So that's the actual tonnage of millions of pounds. And we can see that there's been in the last 3 or 4 years a decline in the total hot mix asphalt. And Caltrans is mandated to use a certain amount, and so when in the way it's written is they use a certain amount of their total hot mix asphalt. So when the total goes down, so will the amount of crumb rubber used, but the percentage is going to be 35% or more. And so right now, we'd expect to see that it's going to be around 35% moving forward, which is their mandates. It's their minimum. See if I missed anything on that. So just as a data point, Caltrans estimated that they diverted 2.63 million tires from landfills in 2022 if we were to take those numbers and turn them into tires. All right, so here's the CalRecycle support that was offered in 2022. We have rubberized pavement grant program, and I know Nick Amante did a great job of summarizing yesterday the CalRecycle programs. So this is just some of them related to tires. There was 25 grantees in 2022, estimated 8.7 million pounds in the rubberized pavement grant program, and there's currently was 5 million awarded in this cycle. And 2022, for the tire incentive program, there were 7 grantees, estimated 15.6 million pounds. The historic average for that program is 12.9 million pounds. And in the current year, there's 3.2 million available in TIP grants. The third one is Tire Derived Aggregate Grant Program, which we just talked about and has, if it's landfills or non-landfills, they're both in the program, average of 10 million pounds per year, and there is an open grant program for that now. Tire Derived Product Grant Program, there's not a solicitation yet, it's every other fiscal grant offering. Historic average is 3 million pounds per year. So those kind of like the categories that make up the pie, that make up the trend charts. Now we're kind of looking at a broader picture. So on the left, we see all the materials for 2021 in California, 77.7 million tons, and 40% of that is gone to recycling, 6% to disposal related, and 54% to landfill disposal. And we use that just to understand how tires relate to the total waste stream. So then the next bar chart over is tires in 2021 at 550,000 tons, or 0.55 million tons. That was 2021, 35% recycling, 20% disposal related, and 45% to the landfill. And then compare that to 2022, which is what a lot of our other graphical representations were showing, is that the recycling rate for 2022 is 34.7%, about the same as the year before. Disposal related went down. That was TDF and ADC values, and we saw that really from the TDF decrease. And then 49.6% went to landfill disposal, which was up. And, as we look at these things, we can interpolate that, the TDF and export have a play in the total values for landfill disposal. On the right, we have the trend over time. And you can see that the recycling rate for tires is pretty good, around 35%, and has been for a long time, and increased a little bit right before the pandemic, and we're still at about that 35% mark. So that's pretty consistent. That's a good thing that we're not seeing a lot of volatility in that. And then the upper line is just all materials, just to give a comparison. So it's basically the same way the data we're seeing on the left and the right, it's just in a different form. This is our summary chart. So here we've got the categories. If we're looking at our chart, we have landfill disposal on the bottom. That's the dark one. Disposal related is the tan one in the middle, and recycled is the one on the top. And then we have two lines, percent recycled. That's the one you're seeing that floats kind of in the middle, that's in that 35% range. And then landfill diversion is the one on the top. Landfill diversion and the landfill bar charts kind of have a correlation there. So what this is kind of tell us is the long-term, let's look at the last 4 or 5 years where we've seen an increase in landfill disposal. And with that, we're also seeing a decrease in disposal related, and recycling has actually been pretty consistent in terms of quantity. Even though our tonnage went up, the recycling rate has stayed about the same. So from 2022 to 21, the recycling tons was up 8.5% to 208,000, approximately 208,000. 2022 recycling rate was 34.7. And then trend considerations is the total tonnage is up, but the recycling rate is stable, or total tonnage is up and the recycling rate is stable. It's the right way to say that. The 2022 landfill tonnage increased, and in this period we had recent business investments and ownership changes, and those things are going to affect the markets for sure, how different companies are coming together or separating or bringing together their operations. There was inflationary pressure in 2022, and it peaked in June, so it's good to note where that economic pressure is in terms of our analysis. So that was really when they started working on increasing interest rates. So the 2023 outlook is that the total amount of managed tires stabilized from previous growth years. That's what we're working on now, and that's what we're seeing, is the stabilizing of that. Recycling rate continues to be stable. Landfill tonnage decreased slightly, maybe more than slightly, but we haven't finished that computation, and ADC use is decreasing. The challenges that we're seeing that are happening during 2023 was we're again coming out of the COVID rebound period, and we're seeing changed consumer patterns all the way through to today as well. That's happening. Continued inflation during 2023, even though they were trying to fight it. And then a perceived 23-24 recession risk is still out there. Low unemployment and increased wages were and did continually resulting in staffing challenges. And the export demand for 2023 is clearly showing almost doubling, and something like that in 24 as well. Okay, with that, thank you, and we'll take questions later. And then next is Jeremy with Target Sports, going to talk about infill. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. So unfortunately, my colleague Cameron couldn't make it today, but I'm Jeremy Michel. I'm the VP of Recycling Operations for Target Sports. So we're going to talk today about the challenges of circularity in the synthetic turf and infill space. I just want to give you a quick market overview. Essentially, since we started artificial turf in the 70s, rubber and turf have been very entwined. That was the original infill that went in the turf. And we're still seeing that rubber is the bulk of the infill that goes in. So all these numbers come from the AMI report. And you can see that still, or it's grown to 850 million square feet installed every year in North America. 45% of which is sport turf. And then globally, we're seeing 41% is replacement fields. So your turf fields typically last 8 to 12 years, and then you're having to replace them. In North America, even though you're seeing such a huge market, we're still growing at a rate of roughly 10%. And now when we look at landfilling and recycling, your typical sports field is 90,000 square feet. In that, you could see up to 9.2 pounds per square foot of infill, so that would be a mix of sand and rubber. And that would be about 225 tons of silica sand, 190 tons of rubber. And in the past, if that turf and infill wasn't reused, all that material unfortunately would go to landfill. So you're looking at 415 tons of material headed to landfill every field. Now, we're seeing a shift towards organic infills on the turf side because, especially in North America in 2014, 2016, we really started to see a strong push away from end-of-life tire rubber as an infill substrate. There was a few highlights in the news, and then public perception really got behind it, and that really started to drive the rubber not being used and a push towards what we're calling organic or alternative infills. And then in Europe, they went as far to ban it, and as of October 17, 2031, all fields in Europe have to have their rubber removed. So this has given them time to get there, because like we talked about, 8 to 10 years is the typical lifespan of a field. So by then, everyone will have been able to flip their fields, and all fields in Europe will then be using an organic or alternative infill. And what we've seen in the sport industry is Europe really leads the charge, and typically what we see that happens in Europe starts to come to North America. So as you see an increase in an alternative and organic infills, that means you see an increase in shock pads. If you're not getting the shock attenuation in the upper layer with the rubber, you now have to get it below the turf. So now you're seeing more shock pads getting introduced. So in Europe, pretty much any field that goes in has a shock pad underneath. And in North America, we're about 20% and growing there. When we look at alternative infills, they have a lot of great and unique properties, but then they also present some challenges too. So most of them are much lighter. So you get a heavy rain event, it's going to float and go off to the side of the field. You'll see some degradation. Again, we're talking about organic materials. They will degrade over time. So that means you're having to go in and top them up to keep your layer the same thickness that you want. And then a lack of shock attenuation, like I mentioned. So these are a few examples of what we're seeing into the market. These are pretty much the top 6. So you'll see a lot of cork, especially in California. California loves the cork. The beauty of cork is it absorbs water. So now you've got a nice soft playing surface that's also keeping the turf cool. As you can imagine, when you have plastic blades of grass, and in the past with black rubber, those fields got really hot. So now the cork allows it to cool down a little bit. Coconut is another big one. Olive pits, again, that's a harder substrate. So now you're playing with, okay, my lighter materials up top, and how do I manage it below with shock bait or shock pads. Corn cobs, it's a newer one. Walnuts, and then tree bark. So while I spoke earlier about the difficulty of landfilling in artificial turf, I'm happy to present that we are actually finally making great strides in the recycling game. Unfortunately, the turf industry in the past, there's been a lot of talk and not much action, but now we're actually starting to see with Target Sports and with other companies out there that we're actually seeing a push towards recycling. So I'll give you a quick rundown of one of our facilities that we have operational in Pennsylvania. It's where we bring in the turf, and I'll just do a quick step-by-step, 7 steps of how we recycle the material. So step 1, we remove the field. We're ripping those fields into 7.5-foot wide rolls. We're rolling them up, we're tying them, and then we're moving them off-site via flatbed. So we then ship them to our Pennsylvania facility. Obviously, all the loads are always tarped. We don't need to leave breadcrumbs of infill going down the road. And from there, we then start to remove the infill. So it's a 2-step process. You're removing the infill first so you can get to a clean carpet. So this piece of equipment is called a carpet beater. That's all it does. It just beats the carpet, removes the infill, dumps it into these bags, and then we run it through our production line where we clean and sort the infill. So you'll get clean rubber and clean sand out the back end. Bag the infill, and then send it to projects. So this, in Pennsylvania, this works great because we still use a lot of rubber in our fields over there. So the rubber and the sand can go both back into new fields. In different areas where we may not be able to use the rubber back in, we're looking at alternatives of working with other recycling outlets to process the material into different molded products. And then step 7, we then send that turf to a partner we have in Pennsylvania where they turn it into plastic lumber. And the beauty of their process is they actually use all the plastics. So for those of you that don't know, turf has 3 main components. You have your polyethylene fibers, your polypropylene backing, and then a polyurethane binder on the back to keep the fibers in place. So they're able to shred up and use all of that material and melt it down into a plastic lumber. So while open loop solutions like plastic lumber is a start, our ultimate goal is to bring end-of-life turf into new products. And one of the ways we're doing that is through key partnerships with a company like Circular Polymers here in California. And this partnership has developed a proprietary process that's able to remove up to 90% of the contaminants. And then that leaves us with a high-value bale of a polypropylene polyethylene mix. And then going further, so our larger vision is, which we're calling Project Circularity, is our pursuit of solutions for a fully circular and sustainable fiber material. The issues around this is obviously we don't want to do it at the quality of the fibers. I think we've talked about microplastics earlier in the conference. What we don't need is now fibers that break down and degrade because of the lack of quality. So it's that balance of finding high enough quality recyclability with ensuring that we get quality fibers out the back end. And then, so to that end, we're working on a few different solutions, such as solvent solutions to mechanically remove and then filter the additives from the end-of-life turf. And then with that, we can create a product that is suitable to be introduced into the core of the fiber. And then also advanced recycling to produce the LDPE polymers for the outside shell of the fibers. And then this is on top of our current projects for nailer boards, drainage tile, and then a TPE infill that we're looking at as well. So this kind of gives you the full view of where we're looking at, how we're trying to manage our waste stream, how we're trying to build a sustainable future. Target is committed to be the most sustainable sports turf company globally. And we've made a lot of great strides in the last few years, and this kind of outlines how we're starting to get there. And that's it, short and sweet. And then we'll open up to questions.
Thank you, Jeremy. So yeah, questions in the room for either of us?
Okay,
One in the back?
I'm coming.
Thank you. Good presentation. On the formulation or reformulation of the plastic lumber and related products, what is the comparable duration of product which is out there, and how is the recycling process comparable? Is it full, circular on that?
On the lumber?
Yes.
So the lumber, they're giving us a lifespan of 20 plus years. It's going to go, most of it, when we talk about lumber in the nailer boards, it goes around the perimeter of the field. So it should last 2 to 3 cycles of the turf. And then they're confident they'd be able to grind it back up and then turn it back into new plastic lumber.
Related question to that. Are the processors out there today that can recycle this?
Yeah, it would be the same company, so they have a large shredder, and as they have to shred up the turf, they would then have to just shred up the lumber.
Hi, Jennifer Bravender with the Michelin. You mentioned that what happens in Europe can often come to the US.
Yes.
However, Europe banned the landfilling of tires in 2002, and that did not come to the US. So just 2 questions. Do you think maybe that infill will remain as an application and not be influenced by the European approach? And also, maybe not for you, but for the others, do you think a landfill ban is ever in the cards?
So I'll start with the sports side because I kind of opened up that can of worms. I was talking mostly about sports industry. We've seen on the artificial turf side that Europe is the leader. So I wasn't necessarily trying to say that everything from Europe comes to here, but on the sports side, it typically does.
On the landfill banning side, that's a political decision more than anything else. You have to have a place for the materials. So just in general discussion, we're not in the EPR position. So I don't know where that would go. I wish I had an answer, but I'm not sure about that.
Hey, just a question. On what basis did Europe ban that in turf fields?
I'm not close enough to that. I think no different than here. I believe it started with public perception, and then it started to just escalate from there. But I'm not close enough. The individuals from Michelin probably are closer to it as they're from France, and they may know, but unfortunately can't answer that. It was swept up in microplastics? Yes. Yep.
One more over here.
I think the rationale behind the banning has to do with the nano scale of the particles. So it's on the nanotechnology side, not necessarily on the health or risk side.
Just wondering what the shock pads are made out of.
So it's a mix. We're seeing there's quite a variety out there. There is some molded rubber pads that are out there. So it's kind of ironic that they don't want to see it up top, but they're good with it below. There's also your 2 big materials are foam. So a cross-linked polyethylene foam. There's 2 providers out there that do recycled cross-linked polyethylene. And then there's a virgin molded expanded polypropylene pad, and that's the other big market. And those 2 really capture it. In Europe, there's a lot of cross-linked polyethylene foam virgin, so just a thin, no different than you'd see in a carpet underlayment. And all that material, it can be recycled, so that's the beauty of it.
So what's the density of this material? And then do you sell it in bags and then the third question, can you control the size?
In regards to shock pads,
Yeah.
so shock pads come in panels or rolls, and the density varies depending on the sport that you're looking for. They roughly between 2.7 to 4 pounds per square foot, but it really depends on what you're trying to achieve for the sport and then for your turf layer up top.
I'm looking at the loose material, the infill.
Oh, the infill.
Yeah.
So the infill comes in bags, and then we spread it using spreaders, no different than you'd see on the back of a tractor.
And the density, 30 pound per cubic feet, or it's?
I'm not
No
close
idea.
enough to the infill. So it varies though, because obviously you've got cork, you've got coconut, and you've got olive pits. So your density is going to be vary quite a bit.
All right. Thank you.
I think that's it for in the house. I have one quick question. All of those products that are, well, I would call them food-based, is there an issue with like birds and things like that coming down to eat all the corn, or?
So yes, some of them. So you get degradation, but then you also get some infill loss because especially from corn, and yeah, you'll see some.
Okay, just curious if that was there. Any questions virtually?
Yeah, we have a couple. So first for Joaquin, what does landfill mean for TDA projects?
So in a landfill, we can use TDA, and landfills do use TDA and landfill gas extraction trenches. And basically, the TDA is a gravel substitute, has a higher void ratio than gravel, so it actually performs better. It also increases the longevity of the trenches as they get refuse filled on top of them. And the trenches tend to pinch, and TDA is compressible, so they last longer than a gravel trench. So there's a lot of advantages in using TDA in landfill gas extraction systems, as well as wet weather pads, because of the permeability of TDA allows the driving surface to be drained when they're filling landfills in the wet season. There are other applications as well, but those are the main ones that are utilized.
Okay, and then one question for Jeremy. How feasible is it to acquire cork as infill replacement for customers that prefer cork to crumb rubber for their synthetic fields?
Like I said, most of our installations in California are cork. We haven't had any issues with our supply. We do have to go overseas to get the cork, but we haven't yet had an issue where demand is oversupply.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Next is break time.
All right, thanks to the panelists there. We are into a break. We'll be back here at 10:15 for a panel discussion. Denise Kennedy is going to facilitate. So we'll see you back there at 10:15. Also encourage you to go over and see the exhibitors, spend a little time with them if you haven't already, and thank you.